All right, thank you for that introduction, Dr. Arderwin. There's really not much more to say. I'm Dr. Holler. I'm going to be talking to you all today about some factors and techniques associated with police officer resilience. And so this is in part based off of some research that I've done with some colleagues of mine at Cookman and as well with my colleagues at Danager Solutions. And so I guess we'll just go ahead and get right into it. So mental health matters. We all know that without our mental health, we cannot be healthy. And just like any part of the body can get sick, you can get heart problems, liver problems, kidney problems. Your brain can also get sick. And mental health conditions are medical conditions that are often triggered or exacerbated by stress that can alter our lives because they make it hard for us to relate to others and to function at work, in our families, in our communities. And without proper treatment, these conditions worsen. They will not go away. Okay, so that's very important to note. Now, what's the difference between stress and trauma? Well, stress is a state of a mental mindset or emotional strain or tension that an individual may undergo. It's due to some type of adverse or very demanding circumstances that we sometimes encounter in life, like psychosocial stressors, for example, a divorce, losing your job, getting your car repossessed, having a lot of debt. Those things are stressors, right? That's different from trauma. Trauma is when you have been in a situation where your life was threatened or someone very close to you, their life was in danger. Or you may have suffered some type of serious physical injury, sexual violence. Those are things that are trauma. So for a trauma, your life has to be in danger, right? So trauma is the body's reaction to life-threatening situations, right? It creates unpredictable emotions and behaviors that are associated with it, like hypervigilance, where you always see a threat. It may create some type of avoidance of areas or situations that remind you of an event where your life was in danger or where you experienced some trauma. And it can also cause recurrent and intrusive thoughts. So even when you're not trying to think about the situation where your life may have been in danger or someone close to you, these intrusive thoughts just pop up kind of at random and you have no type of control over them. There are also physical symptoms like that are associated with trauma that are similar to what you might experience with anxiety, such as having a racing heart, jitters, your hands shaking, sweaty palms, having difficulty breathing. Sometimes people may feel like their heart is racing or they're having a heart attack, but they're not. These are physical symptoms that are associated with trauma, and they're unpredictable. They're long term. They don't often show up immediately following a life-threatening situation. It may take months to show up, like up to 6 months to show up. Okay. So resilience, when we talk about resilience, resilience is being able to successfully adapt to difficult life experiences through mental, emotional, and behavioral flexibility. So that's the American Psychological Association's definition of resiliency. But resiliency is associated with factors such as your worldview, how you see the world. Do you see the world as black and white, good and bad? Do you see the world as being just, and so you believe that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people? Well, your worldview and how you see the world and interpret your situations, how you perceive the situations that you're involved in, contribute to how resilient you may be, right? So some of those thought patterns about black and white thinking or believing in a just world are actually cognitive distortions about how the world really is. We know that there's a lot of gray in the world. It's not so clear cut, black and white. Also, your social resources can contribute to resilience, right? So, do you have friends? Do you have a community in which you feel you belong? Are they supportive at home, in your family, in your community? Those are the social resources associated with resilience. And then there are specific coping strategies that you can do to maintain your resilience. And I'll talk about a few of those at the end of this presentation. So in short, resiliency is the ability to recover after exposure to a stressful and or traumatic event. Just a brief review of what the literature says about police officer resiliency. So law enforcement resilience is essential for helping him or her to cope effectively with the stress inherent in the job. All right, that's according to the Department of Justice 2016. Resiliency is associated with negative, resiliency is negatively associated with anger, right? So what that means is people who have problems with anger, the more anger you get, the less resilient you will be, the less able you are to cope with stressful situations. Resiliency is also negatively associated with burnout, substance abuse, and stress. Again, so people who have experienced what we call burnout, they feel overworked at the job, or who use substances, or who often report feeling stress, those are individuals who have low resiliency, right? Resiliency is also associated with absenteeism. So those individuals who call out from work often, who don't show up when they're supposed to be there, those are individuals who have lower levels of resiliency. But resiliency is also positively associated with job performance, right? So if you're at work and you're doing well, you get commendations, you get commended for doing a good job, you get recognized for your contributions. That is associated with being a more resilient person. So I want to kind of switch gears real quick just to talk about a little bit of research I did on resiliency. So my expertise are in suicide risk assessment. I was fortunate to go to Chicago and do a training for the Chicago PD back in I think 2020, right before COVID hit. And at that training, we talked about the connections between your mental well-being and financial management. So one of my colleagues has a PhD in finance. And so what we did was we talked about your mental wealth, the connection between your mental well-being and financial management. Well, at that training, we distributed a survey to roughly 250 officers from the Chicago Police Department, and we received about 124 responses. We collected some demographic data on age, race, marital status, years in service, college education, and gender. But the main factors on the survey are broken down into these 9 components. So of course we have resiliency, right? We had questions that related to job performance, suicide ideation, sadism, which is having thoughts about hurting other people, marital satisfaction, alcohol use, sleep issues, and exposure to traumatic events. Based on that survey, we found some correlations with resiliency that were significant. They were statistically significant at the 0.01 and 0.05 level, which means that if we were to run this study again in a similar demographic of law enforcement officers in a large metropolitan area, we are highly likely to get similar results. So what is key here? Well, resiliency was negatively associated with financial strain, which means those individuals, police officers who reported having financial strain, they had debt, they had trouble paying their bills, those officers reported lower resiliency levels than officers who did not have that financial strain. We also saw that officers who reported doing well on their job, that was positively associated with resiliency, just like the literature said it would be. We found that sleep issues was negatively correlated with resiliency. So those officers who reported problems sleeping that night, those were the officers who were also who had lower levels of resilience. Suicidal thoughts were negatively correlated with resiliency. So the more suicidal ideation that you have, the least resilient that officer was reporting that they had. Sadism, an interesting one. So having thoughts about hurting other people, right? Those officers who admitted to that were also officers who tended to be low in resiliency. Traumatic exposure, that also was negatively correlated with resiliency. So the more traumatic experiences that you've had on the job as an officer, the lower your resiliency was going to be. And we see alcoholism was, interestingly enough, in our sample, wasn't statistically significant in our correlation, but marital satisfaction was, right? So those officers who reported good relationships with their spouses reported greater levels of resiliency than officers who were having difficulties in their romantic relationships. So, what does this all mean? Well, the evidence suggests, again, just like the literature suggested, that financial well being, job performance, marital satisfaction are all positively associated with resilience among police officers. So, when you're selecting officers, we may want to look at criteria that involve screening for financial well being, job performance, and marital or relationship problems. In order to enhance officer resiliency, then it is suggested that we should, train officers in personal financial management and professional development, as well as provide marriage and family counseling. Okay. Now, there are 3 techniques that I'm going to discuss that can help improve resiliency in an officer. And this is based off of some research by Marsha Linehan, who created dialectical behavioral therapy. And it was also, these techniques were used in a holistic mental and physical wellness program that I created with some colleagues of mine at Bethune-Cookman University. And in particular, we had a training program for first responders and law enforcement. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about 3 of these techniques. The first technique is mindfulness. So mindfulness refers to quieting the mind, calming the emotions in order to access insight, your intuition, and inner wisdom for solving problems. So there are 2 techniques for mindfulness. It's kind of like meditating, if you want to think of it that way. So you can focus the mind on things, or you can open your mind. Focusing the mind, a demonstration of that might be to just kind of sit in a kind of meditative state, a relaxed state, and take a mental assessment of your physical body. And so you would, start with your feet at your toes and take a mental assessment of, how do I feel in my feet? Are there any pain? Are there any aches? Do I have any cramps in my toes? And then from there, you would move up to maybe your ankles. So you say, okay, my feet feel fine. I feel good there. But my ankles, how are they? Okay, my ankle's kind of sore. I didn't even notice that my ankle was sore. And that's probably why I was limping earlier. And then you move on up each section of the body till you get to the top of your head, right? And you just take a mental assessment of how you're feeling physically in your body. It helps to ground you and bring you and help you to be present in the moment in your body. Because oftentimes our minds are elsewhere, either in the past or we're worried about the future. Opening the mind is a different technique of mindfulness, and this is when we just take a mental assessment of the thoughts that come into our mind without placing value judgment on those thoughts, right? So maybe I might notice that if I'm sitting in a meditative calm state and I'm trying to open my mind, I might notice that I had a thought about being hungry, or maybe I smell McDonald's and it made me think about going to get something to eat. Now, I may not act on that. I'm just taking a mental assessment of the thoughts as they come and go. Maybe I had an argument, with my spouse in the morning. That's kind of typical, or at night, right? And so I'm thinking about that. And instead of making value judgments on if I was right or wrong in that argument, or if he or she was right or wrong in that argument, we just take a mental assessment that, oh, these are the thoughts that are passing through my mind and my subconscious, and they will pop up, and you just kind of take an assessment of them and let them go. We don't place any value judgment on it. That would be opening the mind. Another way to open the mind would be to focus on what you see around you, right? If you focus on some colors or the sounds that you hear, these are different ways that we can open the mind. Okay, and so this is something that you could probably do if you're in the car in between calls, right? Or if you're starting your day, you could, sit in the car and in a calm meditative state before you start up the engine, right? And take a mental assessment of how you feel physically and or what kind of thoughts are coming through your mind without putting value judgment on it. And of course, this goes into more depth, but in the time that we have, these are some quick techniques that you can practice. Emotion regulation is another technique. So emotions change with time, and it's important for us to be able to take a step back from a situation and or do the opposite reaction of how we initially feel, right? So this is called the stop technique. Stop, take a step back, observe the situation, think about what you want to do, and then proceed with the action instead of impulsively just reacting based off of how you feel emotionally in the moment or whatever triggered you in that moment. It's important to always stop, take a step back, take a deep breath, observe the entire situation that you're in, and then proceed with a deliberate plan and step of action. Okay. The next is called opposite action skill technique. This is a little uh, probably different than what most people have heard of before. So, opposite action skill technique is when you respond in the opposite manner from your natural biological response. So, for example, if you are having an interaction with someone in the community while you're on the job, and they're being very rude to you, they're calling you names, they may even spit at you, right? Your natural inclination might be to aggress back at that person, to call them names too, to raise your voice and yell. But the opposite action skill technique says that when people respond to us with aggression or anger, we should stop, take a step back, and then respond in the opposite reaction from what is natural to us, right? So if someone's aggressing to me, instead of being verbally aggressive back to them, I might be calm and polite and say, I understand that you sound very angry with me, but how can I help you? How can we solve this situation that we're having right now? And I know it sounds like, in the heat of the moment, how can you do this? It takes practice. It's not easy, but these are empirically supported techniques that have been shown to work. All right, and it can help to de-escalate a situation, which is hopefully what most of us want to try to do when we have to, have conflicts or confrontations with people on the job. The third technique is called distress tolerance, right? So distress tolerance is when you change the body's chemistry to quickly reduce the overwhelmed emotional mind, right? So there are two techniques, okay? And these are things that you can do physically that will change your brain chemistry in the moment to help, diffuse a situation, right? So the tip technique is temperature, right? Changing your temperature. So one thing that we do or recommend people do is you might take a really cold rag that you dipped in, ice water, and it's really cold, and you take that cold rag and you put it on your face or on your neck. And that change in body temperature to reduce your, if you're feeling really hot and tense, you want to reduce your body temperature by, immersing your hand maybe in some cold water or using the cold rag on your face or splashing cold water on your face. Those things will change the chemistry in your brain and will help to reduce the overwhelmed emotional mind. Intensity. Intensity is another part of the tip technique, right? Intensity is when we have a burst of physical activity or exercise to change our physical chemistry in our body and our brain. So for example, if you come home, you're stressed out from work, you had a really bad day, before you go in the house and take that negative energy into the house with you, the tip technique says for intensity, you would do a burst of energy or physical activity such as running, right? You would go out, maybe run down the block at full speed, put all your energy, heart, and desire into running or sprinting as fast as you can for as long as you can. And after you've done that burst of physical energy or exercise activity, that will reduce the body's energy. It will tire you out, and it will help to decrease the likelihood that you're going to have a negative experience when you walk in the house because your body is just going to be drained. So again, these techniques are to change the body chemistry physically quickly in order to reduce the overwhelmed emotions that are in our mind. We also have the pace technique. The pace technique is probably something people are familiar with. This is when you do controlled breathing. You take a deep breath. You might breathe in for 4 seconds. You hold it for 3 seconds. And then you do a controlled breathe out for another 4 seconds. And you repeat that 5 times, 10 times, however long that it takes for you to feel like you have, you don't feel as tense and that your mind is feeling a little more calm. Okay. And the last technique in the distress tolerance technique is called self-soothing technique. And this is when you engage your 5 senses by doing things that feel pleasant, comforting, and provide relief from stress or pain. So for example, you might keep some peppermints with you in the car. And when you're feeling stressed out or tense, sucking on that peppermint might help to put you in a different mental state so that you can cope with whatever issue was distressing you, right? You may like certain smells like peppermint or eucalyptus and keep little containers of oil, right, with you so that, between your calls, if you had a stressful call, you saw some domestic violence or an injured child, before you go to that next call, you might want to, take out the oil of eucalyptus and take a smell, right? Because that will help reduce the tension that you feel and put your mind state in a different place, right? And so we know that the olfactory senses, the smell is connected straight to the brain, so it's going to be a quick reaction, right? So this is why it's recommended. You might have touch is another sense. So you might have things like a stress ball or some furry type materials that you can touch or hold in your hand that is calming for you. So touch is another way that you can self-soothe. Okay. Hearing is another sense, right? Music, if you like jazz music, classical music, something that's going to calm you, right? You don't want to play too much, heavy metal or rap music that's going to get you really hype and intense. You want to play something that's going to calm you down and soothe you, right? In between these calls, when you have a moment in the car or before you go in the house or before you start your day, right? These are techniques that you can do on the go. So we talk about taste, touch, smell, and sight, right? So for sight, oftentimes we could have a small picture that we keep. I have a picture of my family that I keep in my office, and when I'm having a rough day, I take a look at that picture and I kind of just take a minute to take a step back, take a couple of deep breaths and look and say, okay, this is why I'm doing what I do. Some officers may have pictures that they keep with them that might work for you, or to just sit back and pull your car up at a park and look at the beautiful scenery that you see around you. Just take note of the day. Maybe it's a sunny day out, you want to look at the sky. Just give yourself a minute to reduce your tension, reduce your stress levels so that you can cope and stay resilient. So these are just some references for some of the work that we've done. Hopefully I haven't taken up too much time, but I'm going to go ahead and pass it back over to Dr. Ardoin, and we'll take some questions. Thank you.